Hi guys, today I'm going to show you how to make Gall ink, and what you're seeing before you are the basic ingredients for Gall ink, minus water. So there are a lot of different recipes that you can find online. This book, Make Ink by Jason Logan, has actually got a recipe for Gall ink in it that's pretty similar to what I've done in the past. And it has a lot of great recipes for other types of ink, colors, and it's all natural made materials, so it's a pretty great way to sort of experiment with the natural world, and sort of we're in this state of being indoors a lot, so this is actually kind of nice because you can gather things on walks when you get your sort of limited outside time. So the main ingredients to make Gall ink are galls, ferrous sulfate, so iron, and gum arabic, and then we'll also be using a good amount of water. So what is a gall? This is a gall. This is a gall. So is this. These are all galls. They're from oak trees. Specifically, these galls are from oak trees in the Bay Area. It's a mixture of galls from Oakland, ones from Stockton. You can find them on a lot of the oak trees that you see around. You'll see them in the trees. And one of their nicknames is oak apples, which you can kind of see why. What are they? So galls are simply acorns that have had gall wasp larva. So it's actually a specific kind of wasp that will grow basically in the acorns, and then when they are mature they will leave, and that's how you get these little holes. So you can see those. It's from where the wasps have left. Now, unlike an acorn that's quite dense, quite heavy, when the acorns become galls, they actually become very, very light. It's I would say it's pretty similar to something like balsa foam. It's very styrofoamy. So you can see, you can kind of hear how foamy it is. So this material, this is what is sort of the base of the ink. Now, Gall ink has been used for hundreds of years. It's one of the oldest inks that you can find in written manuscripts. Now, it is, because of the tannins inside the galls, it can erode paper after a certain amount of time. So you think about using traditional vellum, it can hold up a little bit more. But as far as archival inks go, it can eat your paper a bit. However, it does create a really nice effect. So this could be something that you would use for a quick turnaround project. Maybe something that gets scanned in and manipulated. Maybe you make a texture to use in Photoshop or Illustrator. So it can be used a lot of ways. Now, how do you make the ink? So this is actually a jar of ink that was made 2 semesters ago. And it is made from galls that I picked up in Stockton. Now, you could see by that jar that's it's very, very dark. It's black, right? Now that's ideally what you want these materials to sort of make. Gall ink can really range in color. It can go from sort of a gray brown to a very purple black to some like very, very pure blacks. Really just kind of depends on your mixture, on the galls themselves, on the tree, etc., etc. There are a lot of different styles of gall if you look it up online, you can see that these sort of rounded, very orb-shaped galls are not really the end-all be-all. There are some galls that will grow on roses, some in different types of trees, but we're going to be using the oak gall to make our ink. So what do? Basically, you are going to be using, and I will demo this at home, a food processor. You can also use like a coffee grinder, a blender if your blender is pretty hardy to blitz these. You want them to be really dry. So when you're looking for galls, you don't want them to have just been in like a rainstorm, something like that. You want to get them when they're dry. You know, they have a good dry sound. And then you're going to blitz them, you know, sort of this consistency is fine, right? It doesn't need to be super, super fine. You can also use a mortar and pestle. I find that sometimes they are a little bit resistant to wanting to be crushed that way. Like they kind of need a blade. So if you use a mortar and pestle, I would advise like kind of chopping them up roughly before you get into it. So, galls, you are gonna, I would say if we used, we'll just use these as an example. If we used this sort of quantity of gall in our recipe, we blitz these up. We then take these, soak them, and for this many, I would say maybe 1.5 cups to 2 cups of water overnight. You don't want it to be the distance between the gall and the water to be really high, right? You want them to be, you know, the water to just maybe go above where the galls are in the container that you're using. So it's really, you're really trying to extract as many of those tannins out as possible. And then from there, you're going to take your ferrous sulfate. Now, you can get ferrous sulfate, iron sulfate, it's generally called the same thing, on many websites. A bag this size is about $5 to $7. And this, you know, I don't know if I'm ever going to have to buy another bag, because for this amount, I might use like a tablespoon of this max. And when we do it, when I show you what happens, you'll see it's pretty instant when you end up adding the iron sulfate to the gall mixture, to the sort of pulp. It'll go very, very dark very, very quickly. Now, ideally, you're going to strain this mixture before you sort of get to the ferrous sulfate, and definitely before the gum arabic stage. You can strain with cheesecloth. They're really great painter bags if you've ever had to strain paint for like an airless sprayer or an airbrush, something like that, which you can get at the store. They're very cheap. Normally you'll get 2 and it's just a couple bucks. You can use coffee filters. You can use a really fine like dishcloth. Basically you want to get out all of that really chunky texture, because you want to have a nice clean wash of ink when you're actually using the ink. You don't want to have like a lot of particle in there. So if you do use something like a washcloth, you might strain it a few times just to make sure you get all those big chunky bits out. So you have your mixture. How long do you want it to soak? So that water gall mixture without any of these other parts, I would say at least 24 hours. That'll give you sort of the best results. You can let it soak for longer than that. It's not wholly necessary, but because you'll end up losing a little bit of water to evaporation. So 24 hours is pretty good. You just put it in a Tupperware or a jar or something like that, something that's covered. Then you're going to take that, strain it with all of those supplies that I named before. All of those will work. And then you're going to add your tablespoon. You can go up a little bit more from that if you have a bigger batch. And then really just like a few drops of gum arabic. It doesn't need to be a lot. Really, the gum arabic is going to act as a binder. It's functioning how it does in watercolor and gouache, in a lot of sort of homemade ink making. you want something besides the dye. You want something to sort of help bind it to the paper, bind it to the whatever surface prep you're using, so that it has a little bit of longevity. So just so you know, like these, the wasps, the galls, they don't actually hurt the oak trees. I know it seems like something that could be like invasive. You're thinking of maybe like holly or mistletoe or something like that that can kind of invade a tree, but it is not like mistletoe. Doesn't actually hurt the oak trees. So just feel better. You're using something that exists in nature, that's free, that helps the environment, and you're able to make something that's really quite lovely out of it. So we are going to probably switch over to my house camera now, and then we will come back and I'll show you what the ink looks like. All right. Okay, so earlier I was talking about how you can use either a food processor or a coffee grinder or some blenders to pulverize the galls, but you can also use a mortar and pestle. It's just a lot more work. So as you can see, it's a little bit harder to get a good consistency out of mortar and pestle. You can definitely do it. It just takes a lot more time. So we are going to do the quick way. Empty now. Okay, so if you want to put these into a food processor or blender, it's a good idea to sort of turn them into bigger chunks. That way they don't catch the blades. Bottoms up. Okay, much easier. Undoubtedly, it helped to break up the pieces into smaller chunks ahead of time, but the blender is much better at its job. So I would advise blender over food processor any day. As I talked about before, you're going to want to get a Okay, so we are going to be taking the mixture from yesterday, this Gall mixture, which is pretty thick, pretty gloopy, and we are going to be adding it into our Chemex where we can strain it. So it's just a coffee filter, regular Chemex, and we are just gonna pour it in. Okay, well, that's it. Okay, so based on the amount of liquid that was produced in this batch, which is it's like maybe a little bit over a cup, maybe a cup and a quarter, we are actually going to use about half a teaspoon of the ferrous sulfate, the iron, in this mix. So the cool part about this is hopefully you'll be able to see it in a sec. So that's about half a teaspoon. We add it to the mix. It should pretty much immediately go very, very dark. So currently it's pretty brown. You can see kind of a coffee color, and then it will change. And you can already see that the color is getting much cooler. We are going to do another half teaspoon, so we'll actually get to be more closer to a full teaspoon. And you can see how much darker that has gotten. So it's really a dark gray color now. Okay, so we're gonna let that oxidize a little bit, and then we'll come back and we'll put in the gum arabic. Okay, so this is what the mixture looks like after it's oxidized for a few minutes. It's really quite dark. You can see the difference in color compared to what it was before. So for this amount of liquid, we're only going to put in a few drops of gum arabic. Ideally, it'd be good if you could use like an eyedropper, but with this, we are just going to do like a very small amount. And that's good. So that amount of gum arabic really is just going to act as a binder in this mix. And we'll give it a few stirs. And that is probably good. It's not a huge amount of gum arabic. The ink will stay like this. It's very, very liquid. It doesn't tend to change, alter, evaporate that much. I'll show you a batch I made a year ago, and it's pretty similar in consistency. And when you use it, you will see that as you lay it onto the paper, as it oxidizes, the color will change, and it'll be pretty apparent. So the state it's in now, this here, put the lid back on. We'll let this continue to mature a little bit, and then I will show you what it looks like. Okay, so the next step that I want to show you is how quickly the ink can oxidize. So we're going to do a little pass. You can see how light it is. right? And you can see already where it's doubling over itself, it's already starting to oxidize more. So then when I go even just now, right next to it, and it's only been a few seconds, you can see how different the color is. So we're going to give this a few minutes to sort of develop and dry. And then do just a little face. So you can see where the lines go over, how much the paint has already changed. Now the nice thing is, with this ink, you can continue to go over passes once everything has dried to bring out darker values. So, you know, it's, even though this color specifically is probably only going to go to a dark gray, just based on the mixture, if I want to go back into it, do a few darker versions, I can just continue to add more ink on top of the existing drawing. So let's do a very interesting hairstyle. Sort of a Elvis look. Okay, so again, this first pass, let's go right next to it. You can see how different the color is. So it starts from a pretty cool gray and it goes to a fairly warm gray purple. And you know, we can come back to this, do another pass, and you can see how different the color will be once you start to layer it up. So yeah, so this is Gall Ink. Useful, long-lasting, a little acidic, but can be a very beautiful material to use in your work. Just be aware of all those facts. Ideally, if you can, you might use it on vellum. You might do some nice layers of gesso or a medium or something before, to separate your substrate and the ink. That way it's got a little bit of space. It's not going to totally eat your paper. A lot of good solutions there. You could even use like a prepped piece of wood. You'll just want to sand it down really well in between your layers of gesso. That way you've got a nice smooth finish to work on. Alright, so there you go. Gall Ink, made from galls, made here in Oakland. What could be better?